Monday, Rambam, Shmita, and Yovel, the laws of the sabbatical year, chapter 11, Yud Aleph. Number 1, Eretz Yisrael Metzaleket Shvatim, Enin Mekmeis L'Smisus, Shenema Veres L'Simke L'Smisus, that Eretz Yisrael, when it was divided for the Shvatim, for the tribes, can never be sold for a permanent sale, like it says in the pasuk, in the verse. And if someone did sell it, both the buyer and the seller have transgressed the prohibition. And their actions do not count, but it gets returned to the original owner in the Jubilee year, even though they said it would be forever, it does not last. Phase number 2, in the Yitzhak B'Yovel, Shein Chayz B'Yovel, Dover Nimke Stam, or Nimke L'Smisas. Someone says, I'm selling you this field for 60 years, which for sure a 50-year cycle will end during the 60 years. The answer is, it does not go back in the Yovel year, the Jubilee year, only something which is sold without any conditions, or if it was sold permanently, which we just said you can't do. Those two cases will go back in the Jubilee year, but for 60 years, you follow the condition. Gimel number 3, a person should not sell his home or his field, in the field that he has from his family and hence in the ancestry inheritance, unless he becomes poor. If his brother, in other words, if your brother becomes poor and then sells his fields, but you can't sell it just to have money in savings, or to do business, or to buy vessels, or to buy slaves and animals, only for sustenance, for food. If you went ahead and sold in any event for any of the reasons which we just said you shouldn't, it is still considered a valid sale. Dalit, but done bevezdin, but there are state in stay achusa, and Bezdin the court will judge and make judgments in accordance with the laws of, and Pater Chayim is a home in a walled city, and Stei Achuza is a field that you received in an inheritance. When you sell a field that belongs in a family, you will calculate the years left to the Yovel, the Jubilee year. And anytime he wants to redeem this field, so to say, buy it back, he will go over, do so in accordance with the years left till he hits the 50th year. That will be explained momentarily by the Rambam. And he will reduce and not and keep, so to say, they'll calculate how many years are left and only pays the difference. What does that mean? Hey, 5. Kate said, it's 10 years left to the Yovel. And he's selling him a field for 100, which means each year has a value of 10. He went ahead and kept it for 3 years. And then the fellow who sold it comes and says, I want to redeem it now. I need it back. So he has to give only 70. And then you get the field back. Because there was 10 per year, he had it for 3 years, so you take that off of the total of 100. If he ate 6 years, then he has to give him 40, because that's what's left is 100. If he does not redeem it, but leaves in the hand of the person who bought it until the Jubilee year comes, then it returns it without any money being dealt with at all here. Like it says in the verse, according to the number of years of the produce, you will sell it. Vav 6. If he sells it when it's full of produce, right before it's about to be harvested, and then he comes to him 2 years later to buy it back, to redeem it, he can't say, I'm only going to redeem it when it's full of crops and produce. Lefichach Machal Amalei Pes of the Rosh Hashanah, Go Lachar Shtei Shanim, Rezo Yechel Shalosh Truas, B'Shtei Hashanim, Ve'Nachashiv Imo Elufei Shtei Shanim Bovat. So Rambam says, what could happen if you sell it full of produce, right, ready to be harvested right before Rosh Hashanah, and it redeems it after 2 years? So the person who bought it will have actually benefited from 3 harvests, the one that he got right when he bought it, and the 2 years worth of harvest. But in the calculations, it's only going to count as 2 years. Because we count according to the years and not according to the crop. So even though technically there were 3 crops worth here, nonetheless there was 2 years here. So the calculation is 2 years, even though the buyer for this period had it for 3. Zion, Hakanim 7, Hakanim Azamayris, there's like the branches and the twigs and the wild fig trees. So they belong to the person who bought it, like any other produce. But if a tree was cut down or dries up, they're both both are forbidden. Case of Yatsa, so what should they do? Is it both are forbidden to benefit? They should go ahead and sell this field with that money, buy another field that's not dried up and not cut down. So in other words, now it's a proper field that could produce crops, and then he will eat until he comes to redeem it. So since it was cut down and dried up, and no longer we have crops, you can't calculate crops, so you sell it and buy another field where you can. If a person buys this field and goes out and plants trees and thereby increase the value of the field, so you do take that into account when it returns during the Jubilee year. And therefore the owner of the field has to give back some money to the buyer, because the verse says that the house which was sold will be returned, which means the value of the house, but not the value of the increase. So you do take that into calculation. Test number 9. Legal the Rambam says, the verse says shnei tefuos in the calculation of 2 years of its crops. So therefore we learn that it must remain in the hands of the buyer for at least 2 years. And even if the purchaser wants to return it earlier to the original seller, he's not allowed to. Never, because it says in the verse, but because it says according to the years. Years is plural. Plural means 2. It means at least 2 years. So you have to sell it, and it has to be retained by the buyer for 2 years, and then it could be redeemed. Yud 10. And the purchaser, the fellow who buys it, has to eat 2 crops, to harvest the field twice. Like it says shnei tefuos, because it uses the word tefuos in the pasuk. It doesn't just say 2 years; it says 2 crops. Therefore, or so therefore, if one of them was a sabbatical year when you can't harvest, or the Rambam says other years that were problematic, whether due to wind or due to other dry, etc., and therefore they did not produce crops, they are not included. So if you have 1 year of the sabbatical year, you need to have another 2 years, so 2 years worth of crops before you redeem it. Yud Aleph 11. 11. What about if the purchaser decided, in other words, it wasn't a natural situation, the fellow who bought it decided, I'm going to let it sit fallow for a year, right? or he ate 1 year and then he started to plow it. But he didn't plant it. Right? He just turned over the soil to plow it, to make it prepare it, but he never actually planted anything that year. They do count. If you sell it during the year of the Jubilee year itself, the sale does not count, and the money is returned automatically to the seller. The first part basically is that if you work the field and you decide to leave it, that counts as one of the years towards these 2 years you need to have. If something destroys or the sabbatical year would be outside of your abilities, then it does not count. You base 12. If you said it has to be 2 years, so what if you sell it the year before the Jubilee year? The answer is he gets to have it, benefit from it, his second year, because he has to have 2 years after the Jubilee year. Use Gimel 13. What if he sold a field that is full of water or it's a rocky land, so he can't plant anyways? Then he can redeem in less than 2 years because the 2 years is connected to Shnei Tefuas, crops. Only a field which is able to be planted and produce crops has this 2 year limitation. This 2 years at least that you sell it for. But if it's a rocky field and it can never be planted, you sold it that way, then it can include it in this concept of 2 years of crops. But nonetheless, it will be returned in the Jubilee year, no matter how many years. Yudal at 14. If he sold ilanis trees, they still have this 2 year statute of limitations, if you wish, of which you cannot redeem it earlier. But if you do not redeem it and a Jubilee year comes, the field of trees will not return, because the verse says that it's talking about achuzasai, which is a place where you live, and not trees. 15, 20, if one person sold it, and then the buyer sells it, and then the next buyer sells it, even 100 people, one after the other. The Rambam says, when the Jubilee year comes, Tachsel Adon Arisha returns to the very first owner. Like he says in the verse, that the field will return in the Jubilee year to the person who was bought from, whose original field it was. Again, he inherited it, was in sort of his ancestors' field. He got it. So even though it's sold 100 times, it will be returned to him. 16. If he sold it to the first person for 100, and that person then sold it for someone to 200, $100 profit. Nonetheless, when the original owner, the first person, wants to come and redeem it, he makes a cheshbon, he makes an accounting in Mechashev Eli Marishish Nemer Elisha Shem Machalai. He only makes an account. It was the first person that he sold it to. He doesn't have to worry about the rest, no matter how much money there was. Machar L'Rishon, if he sold it to the first person for 200, and then that person sold it for 100, then the Rambam says, you do calculate with the last person. The Rambam is going to give a general principle in a minute to explain this. If he sold it for 100 and then the value increased under the new owner, and now it's worth to be sold, the value of it is 200, so he makes his accounting only according to what it was when he sold it. On the reverse, if he sold it for 200 and then it decreased in value for whatever reason, and now it's only valued at 100, he makes his accounting according to how it is right now. Why? Because we The general principle is that we always highlight and accent and better the power of the person who sold it and make less and weaken, so to say, the power of the person who buys it. Since Torah tells us that it has to return in the Yovel, that means the first owner needs to take ownership and hold on to it. So everything we do, we account to make it easier and better for that person who was the first the first owner who sold it. So if the benefit goes to him to work with the person he sold it to, then we say work with the person he sold it to. If the benefit to him will work with the second, third, 100th person, then we go to the 100th person. Yezayin 17. If a person comes along and says, I sold you my field, now I want to come and redeem the field. So what am I going to do? I'm going to sell some other fields I own, right? In order to redeem this field, we don't listen to it. It says in the verse that he will find enough to redeem it. What does that mean? That he has to find something that he didn't have at the time. When you find something, means I don't have it, and now I'm finding it. If I owned a whole bunch of fields, then I had it. So therefore, we can't sell them in order to redeem them. The same thing, you can't borrow money to redeem it. Sorry, because it says in the verse that he has it, that he can obtain it and acquire it, and not that he can loan through a loan, that he has to go loan and borrow the money. Apologize, something caught in my throat here. 18. If he found a little bit of his resources, and so therefore he's going to only redeem half the field he sold, you don't listen to him. Because it says a girl is kula and a girl. Either you redeem the whole field or you don't redeem any of it. It's an all or nothing proposition. And then if a relative wants to redeem it, a relative of the original seller, since it was in the family field, as our relative says, I want it, if you're not going to redeem it, the verse says that he can do that. He can do so, and his relative will come and redeem it. You test 19. If he gave it as a gift, I take my family field and I give it away as a gift. Nonetheless, it will return to me in the Jubilee year, in the Yovel, because the verse says that everything will return, even a gift. 20. If two brothers divided in an estate, they can both consider like purchasers, and each one has to return his portion to the other one in Jubilee year. But their division doesn't get nullified. So in other words, they don't have to recalculate the entire estate. They just swap parts and return one part to the other. And all the same thing, same thing if someone was a firstborn, or did yibum, which we learned about earlier, is when you marry your brother's wife, if you have no children, then they also have to return the portions back to the other one in the Jubilee year, and then they take another portion instead of, you have to swap, because something has to be returned. At the same time, you take possession of something. 21. But if you are, if a husband who is now going to inherit his wife's property, his wife passes away, and we learned that one of the extra gifts, if you wish, that the sages enacted that happens during benefits of a marriage, is that the husband can inherit from his wife, even though from strict Torah law that doesn't happen. The rabbis enacted it. So the rabbi says it does not return. because the sages wanted to make their enactment so strong that people should realize they're serious, that they gave it this kind of serious level of ownership that it does not return in the Jubilee year. And if he inherited from his wife a family burial plot, that he has to return to the family, because it doesn't look nice for the family, the reputation of the family, so to say, if their burial plot is not owned by somebody who's not part of the family. For us, and they will pay him for it, the value of it, but they won't pay him for the value for the burial spot for his wife plot for his wife. His wife passed away, because he is obligated to bury her. That's one of his obligations as a husband. So he will give back the family burial plot, get back money, but not the money of his wife's plot. And with that, we finish the parak.